You'll have to brace yourself for this one because many of you might find this utterly indefensible and a complete and utter insult to every victim in this story. So a High Court judge has been widely criticised for wishing all the best to a self-confessed terrorist behind the 7/7 London bombing in 2005, and that court documents show was also the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, and was convicted for setting up a terrorist training camp in the United States and then went to prison for a long time. So before I get into that, if I could ask you to please subscribe to the channel here, because many of these things and other stories that I'll come onto in this video are not reported properly in the mainstream media. I will be that voice for you. I will never sugarcoat things. I will tell you what I think every single time. So please subscribe. We are heading towards 1 million. Thank you so much. So let's go to this story here, shall we? So I will link this in the description below. You can read it, form your own views as always. Let's take a look at this story, shall we? And why I think this is a matter of national security and puts everyone in the UK at risk. And of course, the words complained of used by the judge. So this is Haroon Aswad. As I mentioned, the mastermind behind 7/7 and 9/11, who spent 20 years in prison from 2015 after admitting that he conspired to set up a terrorist training camp in the United States in the state of Oregon. After serving his sentence, he was then deported back to the UK in 2022. He was initially detained under the Mental Health Act, but it was then disclosed that it was expected that he would be released in the relatively near future after effective treatment. I'm not really sure what treatment there is for being a terrorist, but obviously that relates to alleged or purported mental health conditions, which by themselves hang by a thread and don't negate the risk in my view for reasons I'll explain in just a moment. But according to a transcript of the High Court, which was obtained by The Sun, the judge told Aswad, quote, "It could not have been too pleasant being in American custody all that time." Then went on to say, "I have to wish you all the best and say to you that the way forward is to keep on your medication, listen to the advice you are going to get, and keep out of the sorts of things you were doing, because you saw where it ended up and you do not want to go back to that, I'm sure." Now, just pausing for thought for a moment. I don't want to be too disrespectful to the judge here, but that sounds more like telling off a child for stealing cookies before dinner time than a convicted terrorist who confessed to being the mastermind behind these attacks in which countless people needlessly lost their lives. Now, of course, this has attracted the criticism that you might expect. Nigel Farage leading calls for the judge to be sacked over his comments. He says the public demands tougher justice than this by far. Aswad should be in a high security jail until he dies, and Mr. Justice Jay should be sacked, Nigel Farage says to The Sun. Robert Jenrick joined in and said the judge's comments were an insult to the 7/7 victims, and I, for one, agree with him. Nobody should be wishing this evil terrorist well and sympathising with them over their time in prison, least of all a High Court judge. Now, I often tell you that I'll try to remain balanced on this channel. I will try to give you both sides and both points of view and give you another way of looking at it, even if I don't agree with it. So this case shouldn't be any different. So I'll give you one thing to think about. Not that I agree with it. Don't confuse giving you an idea to think about with me agreeing with that thing. But here we go nonetheless. The only possible justification for this judge making these kind of comments to this self-confessed terrorist are that he's currently being treated for mental disorders, including schizophrenia, and therefore what use would it be for the judge to be berating this guy when he's assessing him for the likes of reporting conditions and other restrictions if or when he is released and so on. And therefore he's talking to him as though he is somebody being treated for mental health conditions. That's the only possible justification. Now, I repeat, don't confuse that with me agreeing with that. That is the other side to this picture. Now, the reason I don't agree with that is not just because I have a strong view, which I do, and I'm happy to express it to you, not just because of that, but there are also other reasons for it. Now, this judge has himself been criticised by the Supreme Court, because apparently he was immoderate, ill-tempered, and at times using offensive language, and the Supreme Court ruled that he had directed a barrage of hostility towards a claimant in a libel case and decided that his original verdict could not stand. So, if he was being unkind and unpleasant to a claimant in a libel trial, why, therefore, is he talking to a self-confessed terrorist, mastermind behind countless deaths, like a child who's done something wrong? Now, apparently, he's been treated and diagnosed with schizophrenia disorders, a mental health condition marked by schizophrenia symptoms, including hallucinations and delusions, etc. However, in 2022, a psychiatrist concluded that there was no evidence that he had this condition when the offences took place, and as recently as 2022, he was still threatening to kill Christians, Jewish and other Muslim enemies, and the report concluded that there remains a risk of Islamic violent extremism. So this obviously has caused outrage across the country, and it would seem somewhat justified. But you know what really fascinates me is the different ways that these news stories are reported in the media, the mainstream media, particularly depending on the political bias or perceived political bias of the news outlet. Left or right-leaning outlets reporting differently. Take, for example, the story of Angela Rayner not paying the appropriate amount of tax on her third property. I'm going to compare some headlines for you and show you what I mean. And to do so, I'm going to use a partner of mine called Ground News that makes this easy to do. So take this headline here. UK's deputy leader faces calls to resign after admitting not paying enough property tax. Now, Ground News gives you a great bias comparison because you want to know whether you've got a politically biased headline in front of you. And so it will show you the political bias distribution of any of these outlets and gives you a bias comparison here. So let's take the comparison of the left-leaning coverage, which frames Angela Rayner's stamp duty underpayment as a complex, honest mistake rooted in misleading legal advice, emphasizing her transparency, personal family circumstances, including her disabled son's trust, and Labour's commitment to high standards. But comparing with the right-leaning headlines, they employ a more accusatory tone, spotlighting terms like dodging taxes, under pressure to fire, casting doubt on her explanation by referencing clear government guidelines, and portraying Prime Minister Keir Starmer as weak for defending her. And we can see this play out in some of the headlines. Take, for example, Channel 4. Angela Rayner made an honest mistake on stamp duty, according to West Streeting, reported in Channel 4. But compared with a right-leaning headline from the Gateway Pundit, UK's Starmer under pressure to fire Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner for dodging taxes on her second home. But sometimes there'll be stories not represented adequately by the left or the right. That's why Ground News has a blind spot feature, which it will show you stories that are only covered by a small percentage of the left or the right, so you get the full picture. And as they're a partner to my channel here, I get you a great discount using the code BBB, so you can go to ground.news/BBB for 40% off unlimited access to the world news. So you know you get the left and the right, so you're not going to be persuaded and biased. You may still think the same thing, but at least you get both sides of the picture. So ground.news/BBB for your 40% discount, and you'll find it fascinating. Now, continuing with the theme of stories not being reported properly, adequately, fully, or at all, you are probably familiar, if you've spent any time on social media in the last few days, with this picture here. It is a horrific story, so only read about it at your peril. But this is the story of Irina Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee who was seeking protection in the United States, only to needlessly lose her life in this brutal, unprovoked, needless, and senseless attack. But what really sickens me is the way news companies use this as an opportunity for political persuasion. Now, starting with the premise that this guy is reported to have been arrested at least 14 times on various other offences, this quote here really sums this up. Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent, by Adam Smith, post-quoted by Elon Musk as wise words. Now, you'll see from this post here, there is a caveat, but from this post here, it notes that at the time of posting this, the New York Times did not have any results for the story covering Irina Zarutska, despite thousands for other people. Now, it should be noted that it is, at the time of me recording this, there is a post by the New York Times about this. But you'll see, if you see the snapshot here, it says security footage captured the unprovoked stabbing in Charlotte, became an accelerant for conservative arguments about the perceived failing of democratic policies. Again, giving you political spin on the needless death of a Ukrainian refugee. And if we bring in Thomson Reuters, which actually is quite disappointing, again, leading with a political persuasion here. Donald Trump on Monday condemned the fatal stabbing of Ukrainian woman aboard North Carolina train as the US president and his allies sought to use the murder to justify plans to expand his crime crackdown in Democratic-led cities. And then goes on to talk about the killing and what happened. Now, that may be the case. It may be that they have used this as an opportunity to justify why they want to crack down on crime, but surely that should not be political spin. That should be something by way of common sense. If these things are happening, people absolutely should use this as a justification for why they need to stamp down on crime. And speaking of stamping down on things because they've been proven to happen, I have to show you this second clip by Roger Meir here about Jess Phillips. You'll remember in the previous clip, she confirmed that girls had told her over the years that police were also perpetrators, not just part of the cover-up. Well, here again, here's where you have to be very careful of your choice of words with things, because they can be quoted directly, taken literally, and mean something that she perhaps didn't mean. Listen to this, and I'll tell you why I say that. It might sound a bit garbled, but it'll become clear in a minute, I promise. Listen to this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 28th of April, the Minister was clear with this House that the framework for local grooming gang inquiries and Baroness Casey's audit would both be published in May. It is now June. Presumably then, there is a new timeline for publishing both of these. Will the Minister share it with us, please?
I thank the honourable lady for this question. I do apologise for I suppose the month's wait. I waited 14 years for anyone to do anything.
So obviously she's referring to the documents that were not ready at that time. But her exact words were, she waited 14 years for someone to do something. Despite the previous clip that I showed you, she confirmed that she knew what was happening. So one might reasonably question here, with the knowledge that she said she had previously, was she really just waiting around for someone to do anything? Was she not doing anything? Because in this clip here, she said she was waiting 14 years. Now, I know that was just a sarcastic political attack across the House to say, well, this is a month late, yes, but there was 14 years when you were in government. I know it's a political attack, but this is why politics really frustrates me. And if it wasn't obvious, that's why it frustrates me. Because I like things to be plain and straightforward. Say what you mean, say what you like, say what you don't like. But there is no need for this sarcasm. And as Roger Meir here said, he says, Jess Phillips admitted that she waited 14 years for action on the grooming gangs. 14 years, her own words, 14 years in which she knew that these gangs were abusing children. 14 years in which she admits that she was waiting for anyone to do anything. Now, obviously, I mean, I'm not saying here that she wasn't doing anything ever. She was probably doing a whole lot of stuff that I have no idea about. But this choice of words irritates me, just as when news companies report it and say they are now using this as a political leverage against the other party because this has happened. I find that sickening. Let's stop using the needless, senseless attack and murder of innocent people as political leverage. Let me know what you think about that in the comments, but I do have strong feelings about that. I usually keep my feelings off this channel, but I'm happy to tell you that that's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please do subscribe, and I'll see you next time.